everybody, for joining us for today's special election issue of 3 Healthcare Things You Need to Know from Tallahassee. My name is Fraser Cobbe. I'm the executive director of a number of medical associations throughout the state of Florida from both a statewide and county level. We are very pleased to come to you today to give you a quick update about the elections that everybody is fully aware happened last night. So I'm pleased to introduce my partner, Joe, who is going to introduce himself and set the stage for today's program.
Yeah, my name is Joe Daraskevich. I work alongside Fraser at several societies across the state of Florida and across the country as well. And we get together from time to time when there's important issues to talk about, important messages to bring to our physician members. And last night, like Fraser mentioned, was a big election, not only nationally, but across the state of Florida as well. So we're going to break down some of the things that happened for the physician members in the societies we represent.
Yeah, Joe, and as we get started, as you teed up, a lot of the focus, of course, was on the federal level. We're going to spend most of our time today talking about elections that took place in Florida. So really not going to touch on the federal elections, at least the presidential election. We'll talk a little bit about what happened in Congress from a state of Florida perspective, but not really focused on the overall happenings in Washington, D.C. But pleased to join you. Sorry, I'm dressed this way. You're getting the full John Fetterman action today. I was up late watching the polls come in, so um, you'll have to deal with that. But my apologies in advance, Joe.
You sound good. You look just fine, and we'll dress nice next time.
Appreciate it.
All right, so jumping right in, let's like you said, we're going to focus a lot on statewide things across Florida. Let's start with amendments. What happened last night as far as the amendments go, Fraser?
Yes, so our physicians were monitoring the amendments for a number of reasons, two in particular that were on everybody's mind, Amendment 3 and Amendment 4. At a high level, there was 6 amendments on the ballot. Only 2 of them reached the number of votes you need, 60%, to actually pass and make it into the Constitution. So those 2 were dealing with fishing and hunting and the inflationary update on the homestead exemptions, which may be interesting to some of our physician members that own homes here in the state, of course. But the 2 that really mattered that folks were paying attention to from a healthcare standpoint were Amendment 3 and 4. Neither one of them met the required 60% to pass. The marijuana amendment, Amendment 3, ended up with 55%. And then the abortion legislation amendment, ended up with 57%. So both of them got close to the magic 60% to pass, but neither one did cross that threshold. So we will see what happens from here with those, the proponents of those 2 measures and where they look to next, whether it's another constitutional ballot initiative in a future election or if they turn their eyes to Tallahassee and legislation again. But yep, this major headlines were those 2 both failed to pass the 60%.
Well, and that's a good point too, Fraser, that a lot of times when we get together, we talk about all the different steps that need to take place before things happen. And last night, a lot of people look at the results and say, hey, this didn't pass, this did pass, didn't get to the 60, did get to the 60. And we'll keep people updated throughout the months that are coming on any developments. If these things come back to the table, whether it's through whatever avenue they go, we'll keep everybody in the loop over the next few months on any developments. Moving on to the federal elections, what's relevant for our Florida doctors in the federal realm?
Again, focusing on Florida specific engagement at a federal level, talking about the U.S. Senate and U.S. House. Honestly, there was not much change, and that's going to be a theme you're going to hear both on this and when we start talking about the state level elections as well. This was a status quo election when you boil it down to the state of Florida. So that doesn't mean you can leave this podcast now. It's just we're not going to have too many exciting things to share with you guys. But for the U.S. Senate race, of course, we had the one race. Rick Scott ended up in the end winning comfortably that race. Over in the congressional races as well, no real surprises. I think the one race people were looking at was Anna Paulina Luna over in Pinellas County. She ended up winning by 10%. So that was the one incumbent that people thought was the most vulnerable for flipping, but she ended up being a comfortable winner in the end. Mike Karadopoulos, we should mention, former legislative leader here in the state of Florida. He ended up winning his election. He's a Republican over on the East Coast, and he will be the newest member of Florida's congressional delegation. But for the most part, it was a status quo election for for Florida's representation up in DC.
Well, and I think that's exciting. It's just exciting to know the names and know who's going to be representing our physicians and people in general. So while it's not any kind of upsets or anything like that, we still pay attention and kind of follow what's developing. So maybe we've got some excitement on our third topic here, Fraser. Let's talk about some state elections in both the Senate and the House. There were some races with a focus on those districts and the counties where we manage some societies. So there's some excitement there, I hope. What do we have, Fraser?
Yeah, definitely. And this is the area where the organizations we work with get to participate. Most of them have political action committees and have advocacy agendas that they push forward. So obviously, we've been following closely to these House and Senate races in Tallahassee over the previous months. So starting on the Senate side, kind of I guess the one big race in the Florida Senate that everybody statewide was watching is Corey Simon's race up in District 3 in Tallahassee. It ended up being not that close in the end. He won by over 10% of the vote, but that again was one seat that seemed to be the most vulnerable. Ended up that Corey Simon, former football player from FSU, ended up winning pretty handily in that race. The other statewide race of interest, or I guess Senate race of interest statewide, was Don Gates returning to Senate. He's a former Senate president, has been out for a number of years. Of course, some people remember him now or consider him now Father Matt Gates, but Don Gates himself was a Senate president and had a long career in the legislature. He is coming back now, winning in District 1, again, quite handily, so he'll be back in the Senate. A couple other races to mention. Over in Central Florida, Keith Truenow ran a very contested Republican primary and emerged from that earlier this summer. He did have a general election result or campaign race as well, which he ended up winning pretty easily over in Lake County. So he'll be moving up from the Florida House to the Florida Senate there for District 13. Randy Fine has also taken that step up. That's a name that a lot of people know. He was running in a race over on the East Coast, District 19, and he ended up being successful. A race that the FMA and Physician Society of Central Florida got involved in is Kristen Arrington's race. She's a Democrat over from District 25 in Central Florida. She ended up winning in a close one, 3%. Ended up pulling off that victory in the end. So we're pleased that Kristen is going to be moving up from the House to the Senate as well. And then down in South Florida, just to mention, District 35 was another close race that some of our physicians were watching, particularly in Broward County. Barbara Sharif ended up winning that by over 12% in the end. So we'll see what happens with that. We'll see how that emerges with her stepping into the Senate. She has not served in the past, so she's going right in as a state senator. So that's pretty much the summary on the state Senate side. On the House side, of course, there's a ton of races. So everybody in the House has to run every cycle. Over in the Senate, it was only the odd districts that ran this time. But the House, we had tons of activities. So over 100 races, of course, throughout the state. Not all of them had general elections. So maybe I'll bop into those areas that we represent specifically and talk a little bit about those. Over in Jacksonville, all the incumbents won they're running for reelection. Number of them we have really good relationships with through the Duval County Medical Society, so we were pleased to see that. A few newcomers from that region, Northeast Florida. Kim Kendall ended up being successful in District 18, Sam Greco in District 19, and Judson Sapp in District 20. We're all successful there in Northeast Florida. Coming down the state into Central Florida, there were a bunch of races, and some of them pretty tight that happened there in Seminole Orange County in particular, and some interest in Lake County as well. Nan Cobb, no relation to me. She does not use the E in her name, and again, no relation at all. But she was successful and will be a first-time House member from District 26 in Lake County. Um, Probably one of the other major races that people were looking at statewide is the Erica Booth versus Tom Keene race that was in Central Florida. Tom Keene is the incumbent, and Erica Booth, a Republican, ended up beating him by 5%. So that's one seat that has flipped. Again, not much change happened with incumbents running. You had a few people survived that were really close races in Orlando. Susan Placencia, District 37, won by less than 1%, so 600 votes. and gave her a victory in District 37. David Smith in District 38 in Seminole County also survived with less than 1% of the vote, 750 votes for him. So again, Joe, that's an indication when they say voting matters, it really does. These margins in the House districts are really small.
Yeah,
Um,
that's unbelievable.
yeah, for sure. There was one seat that flipped in Central Florida, Carolina Amnesty, who's been in the media quite a bit, District 45. She ended up losing to Leonard Spencer, who's going to be a new House member there from Central Florida. Again, that margin was 1%, so super tight race. And then in Kissimmee, former Mayor Jose Alvarez, we were pleased. I know he got endorsement from the medical community relatively early in his race to District 46. He ended up winning and will be heading to Tallahassee as a new member of the House as well. And really quickly, I'll jump down to South Florida. Broward County, just wanted to highlight Chip LaMarca. Ended up winning by 15%. All the rest of the incumbents in Broward County ended up winning. Chip is an incumbent as well. Highlighted a bit because there's not many. Broward County is a rather Democratic stronghold in the state. Chip is a Republican. So he ended up winning by 15%, which is a pretty big margin down in that county in general. In Dade County, then looking further, a few races that we are monitoring as the Dade County Medical Association. Fabian Bisabe in District 106. That was an election that had a lot of eyes on it. He ended up winning by 4%. He was the incumbent. Joe Saunders was his Democratic opposition. He ended up winning, squeaking out a 4% win in that. Vicky Lopez, who has been a great friend of medicine from District 113, ended up winning by 9% in the end. So she won pretty handily, comfortably as it came down to it. And then Omar Blanco was another new member running in an open seat for the Florida House Republican. He's from District 115, and he ended up winning by 19%. So pretty handily, pretty large margin of victory there as well. So that's really a focus on the communities we work in directly, but statewide in the Florida House too. Tons of incumbents won. It seems like all of the focus at a national level sucked a lot of the intrigue and everything out of this election. So again, I guess that's a good thing. There'll be a lot of folks that we've worked with in the past returning to Tallahassee, and it'll be good to continue that good work with them.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like there's a lot, like you said, a lot of familiar names, whether it's incumbents that we've worked with in the past, whether it's longtime politicians who have, a track record, in Tallahassee or in these local communities, or whether it's football players that, we used to watch on TV. There's a lot of name recognition, but a lot of new people as well. So our societies, the physicians we work with, we'll get to know those new people. We'll get to work with them all, and we'll rekindle some of those old relationships. So sounds like a
Yeah.
lot happened in Florida yesterday, but that was a great recap, rapid fire. So if you miss any of that, just listen again. Just go back and listen to what Fraser ran through very, very quick. Any last thoughts, Fraser? I mean, what happens now?
Well, and you kind of hit on it a moment ago, like this is a ongoing process. So a lot of people feel like elections come and they're like specific markers in history, which to a point they are, but again, this is a process. Florida, since we have term limits, we end up having a lot of new faces come as cities elections take on more meaning because you're not just electing a lot of incumbents like you do at a federal level. Oh, it happened a lot this year to House and Senate. There are term limits, so that can only go on for so long. So the ability for physicians to stay engaged every election cycle, because there are a bunch of new faces that come up and run in open seats all the time, and the opportunity to get to know them when they're early in their professional political careers running for office is really important to establish that early relationship. So while there were fewer open races this time, both in the House and Senate, we did lay some groundwork for some really strong relationships that should carry forward as they get to work in Tallahassee.
Right. And, election night is a milestone that you can kind of look back to and say, hey, that happened that night. But we do a lot leading up to election night with, meetings with these different lawmakers. And we're going to do a lot going forward. So everything's not over yet just because election night happened. We're going to be doing a lot to make change at the state level in the months ahead. So we'll look forward to getting together, Fraser, you and me, and kind of talking things through going forward.
I do need to correct you on one thing. One thing is over now, the commercials. Thank God.
You're right. You're right. I can go back to watching my favorite TV shows and sporting events, and don't have to mute every commercial or change the channel. So that's a good thing to correct me on there. That is finally over.
Yeah, a little hope for everybody.
All right. All right, Fraser. Well, it's been a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be getting together sometime soon.
Sounds great, Joe. Thanks very much.